Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions and to create space for all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Sunday. We actually have a thought piece scheduled to drop this upcoming Sunday, so be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you are looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available wherever podcasts are playing, and we've provided you with a few links down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And I want to talk today about education. And on the topic of education, we're going to be talking about the education that starts at home. And today's conversation really centers around behavior, the power that our behavior can have on our realities. And I think that a lot of us believe that if there is a symptom, if there is something that we're dealing with, that we're struggling through, that if there's a difficulty or a challenge that we have, that we're facing, that feels insurmountable, that the best way to deal with it oftentimes is to find a doctor, have a conversation, and have a prescription written. And I think that that's really become the culture of today, prescription writing culture. And I have to say that I'm very lucky because I've had doctors who have been super invested in my own health, and for them, medication was the absolute last resort, and always it started off with behavior. Like, let's figure out what we can do, how we can modify your behavior and see how that feedback loops into some of what's going on internally. And I want to have that conversation today because that theme has been even more rampant in my education, in academia as well. I mentioned before, I did a background. One of my degrees is in cognitive neuroscience, and we learned a little bit about neuroplasticity. And pretty much the overarching concept that is neuroplasticity talks about how our capacity to do certain things are mapped to specific areas in the brain, but those are subject to change. Those areas are subject to change. So if ever it is the case that you have like blunt force trauma or you have a head injury, and let's say you've damaged a certain part of your brain, if you do the physiotherapy, if you practice and you try to cultivate those motor skills, that capacity can re-establish itself using a different part of your brain. So while we have a general sense as to like what our prefrontal lobe does, or what our Wernicke area does, or what our Broca's areas does by way of language processing, language generation, critical thinking, all of that stuff, we have a general sense of where those capacities exist, those cognitive capacities exist by way of parts of the brain when we see the relationship between damages to those areas and how it impacts our behavior. But it's not a hard and fast rule, because if some of us had injuries to those areas very young, then our brains are plastic enough that it will cultivate the capacity to engage with the environment the same way using a different part of the brain. Like, you have that neuroplasticity. So we talk a lot about that by way of head injuries, how with head injuries, with commitment, with practice, with focus, that we can re-establish skill sets that we've lost. But I want you to also understand that this concept is at play when it comes to just different behaviors that are just not serving you. So if you have self-destructive behaviors that are not serving you, those behaviors have a neural pathway. They have a neural mapping in your brain. And if you want to change your need to engage in behaviors that are self-destructive and that are self-sabotaging, it's really about cultivating the discipline to shift the small little habits that you have on a day-to-day basis, then begin to build new neural networks in your brain that will enable you to just make that your new normal. And that never seems to be part of the conversation. And so why we exist and why we like to have these conversations around mental health, mental wellness, and education is because I recognize the power of behavior. And also, I think behavior has a wisdom in that it's a slow but sustainable method of behavioral change that is going to have a significant impact on your sense of fulfillment, meaning, and well-being, because those mappings are building over time with interaction and with trial and error. Whereas sometimes what people do is when you're quick to write a prescription, you're playing with your brain chemistry so forcefully, so aggressively. You're breaking things as you're trying to fix things, right? And there's no guarantee that you're fixing the right things, but there is a guarantee that you're going to deal with symptoms and you're going to deal with effects of really playing with your brain chemistry in such a focused way where those risks and the impact that that can have on your general well-being and your mental health and on your quality of life even is significantly reduced if your focus is on behavior. And I know that there are situations that are the extremes where no amount of discipline, no amount of habits are going to shift and change some of the things that we're dealing with if we're dealing with certain, mental and psychological ailments. But I think a lot of what it is that we're dealing with, that we struggle through, I think that if we think about the little habits that build into big behaviors, that build into tendencies and orientations and preferences, and we really draw the feedback loop across those specific areas, and we start to shift small things in our behavior, we can have a great big impact on the way that we're oriented and on the way that our brains are mapped to enable us to engage in our environment a certain way. And so I think that this is less spoken of. I think that behavioral therapy is less the ideal because it's not creating a lifelong customer, right? Like when you're thinking about sustainable long-term change, that's not going to guarantee you customers coming through the door every 3 months, right? Whereas if you have a prescription, that's a lifetime value of a customer. If you're popping a pill to mask the symptoms of the issue rather than figuring out what behaviors, what tendencies, what habits, what thoughts do you need to adjust bit by bit to adjust the mental mapping, the neural network in your brain, bit by bit, slowly and steadily, so that you completely eradicate those issues. And so this is education that starts at home. I think it's an education that I'm happy that I received by way of how I was taught and eventually just sort of develop the autonomy to navigate the healthcare sphere, because the healthcare sphere is focused on sickness and on keeping you sick. But I think that wellness now, which is much newer, has a lot of different angles and different perspectives to it. But the attitude is really about taking that power, that independence back and owning your wellness journey and not having it focalize on illnesses and how you manage life with illness. And I think that that's just a very depressing way of looking at it, right? It's just a negative way of looking at it, to see yourself as someone who is going to combat a specific illness for so long. You identify with that illness as part of who you are. I think that sometimes what we need to do is really create distance from the symptoms that we have so that we can see ourselves apart from the things that are making it difficult for us to attain the quality of life that we're looking for. And I think when the focus is on wellness and the focus is on strategies and methodologies and development plans, as well as different rehabilitation plans that are about long-term sustainable change that don't create dependencies. And I think that this dependency factor is something that we really need to be cognizant of. We want to make sure that any therapies that we engage in, any path or journey that we take towards healing, that it's not creating a dependency. It's not making our healing contingent on something that is external from us as much as possible. And again, I recognize that there are going to be exceptions to this rule, but I think for the most part, wellness is about giving yourself the ability to be autonomous in the way that you show up, in the way that you manage your health, in the way that you manage your relationships, in the way that that you manage, you know, the decision making that you do on a day-to-day basis, rather than having it be contingent on taking XYZ medication or seeing XYZ person. And even when I was working in the HR tech sphere, I was working for an employee assistance program, and there was a model that we used there called the short-term solution focused model, which was focused on getting you back on your feet, fully functioning without the need of long-term care. And I get that that is a model that is specific to certain issues that, you know, can be dealt with and can be supported within a relatively short period of time by goal planning, by establishing goals, and it's very much more aligned to cognitive behavioral therapy. But I think that that is something that we need to think of as a lens to approach life. Like, how can I cultivate the skills that I need to be independent moving forward? So I have a dependency, but for a very fixed period of time, and I'm okay with the fixed period of time where I have the dependency, as I'm cultivating the proficiency and the competency to be completely autonomous in the way that I engage in the world around me within that vein. So I want to have the conversation here online. I think that navigating the healthcare sphere, the academic sphere, and even our careers with the idea of autonomy, with the idea of, well, how do I keep it so that I'm maintaining my independence, and I'm not developing dependencies unnecessarily, and that I'm not making health, well-being, wellness contingent on factors that inevitably are going to harm me in the long run. So I think that's food for thought for you. It's an open-ended conversation. It's my point of view. I've always been very anti-pharma. I wrote my thesis on it. I haven't really mentioned my thesis in a while, but it's the reason why Project Purpose is even in existence. I think doing a meta-analysis and a lot of the misdiagnosis that takes place and a lot of the benefits that a lot of pharmaceutical companies gain from building a culture around medication, around being medicated, around needing medication to live a quality life, and even putting those things together, like to assume that you can only have a high quality of life while medicated, I think is just a false assumption that a lot of us have just bought into, and even creating this sense of helplessness for a lot of people who experience helplessness when it comes to making decisions that are going to impact not just themselves but their children long term when we think about whether or not we take the prescription. So this is education that starts at home. I'm anti-pharma, which doesn't mean that I would never, you know, obviously take medication, but it does mean that I'm very, very mindful and very intentional about when it is the best route, or when slow and steady is the best intervention, right? So when slow and steady is about, well, how do I build myself a network of support that will give me the ability to cultivate the competencies so that I can be independent in the way that I manage this moving forward. I never want to go down a path that's going to create a lot of dependencies and then keep me on that path for longer than I need to be. If there's an alternative that might be difficult, it might be harder, it might be a steeper climb, but more benefits in the end. In any case, that's it for now, but definitely not all. Now, hopefully that gives you some food for thought as you think about where you sit. And I don't know if you have a position yet, or maybe now you're generating one, and maybe definitely take a look at the links that we provided to you down below. But food for thought for you. I think that wellness is really about figuring out how we maintain our sense of wellness in the way that we interact with the world around us without developing dependencies unnecessarily. Now, before letting you go, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that we will be going live at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our Facebook page. So definitely be sure to tune in. Now, these events are paid events, so if you do see yourself participating in our community on an ongoing basis, then I do suggest that you take a look at one of our package plans. Yes, so we do offer package plans over and above our live events, as well as access to webinars and workshops that largely focus on self-mastery over and above those events. So check it out. Be part of our Game Changer community, being part of the change that you want to see, allowing us a small role to play in your journey. We are on the road to 1K, so we do invite you to follow us across all of our social media platforms, and we look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.